25 years at the company.
We're gonna make Starcraft, yeah. We're making Warcraft 3. That sounds awesome, let's do that.
Warcraft sagas. How did it start?
The founders came in and we were all playing EverQuest, and he's like, whoa, we can do better than this.
There was quite big of a stretch transitioning to Starcraft 2.
We changed a bunch of stuff.
Do you think we're in the end of the era of RTSs?
There's still a lot of hope for more accessible RTSs.
New Genshin Impact, Asian motives. I feel like there's a new era of the art style.
We can do anything, let's just do this.
Hi everyone, my name is Ninel Anderson. I'm CEO of Devoted Studios and I'm your host at Devoted SpeakEasy. Today we have an amazing guest, Alan Dilling. Hi Alan.
Hey there.
If you guys don't know Alan has a pretty insane career in video game industry. Someone who spent 25 years at one company, and not just one company, the company. Even though Blizzard have had quite a bit of EVPR with their recent changes and acquisition at Microsoft, I don't think anybody would deny of the tremendous impact the company have done in the gaming industry in general. So I cannot wait to hear all of the changes and, apps and flows that you have seen over the 25 years in the industry and specifically at Blizzard. So how about you just give me a few highlights during your 25 years of experience?
It's one of those things where it's like a marriage. It sounds like it's a super long time, but it goes by quick. And I started there initially on Starcraft. I thought, we're gonna make Starcraft, yeah. And then they get there and like, we're making Warcraft 3. I'm like, that sounds awesome too. Let's do that. That was my initial thing. I started as a animator, modeler. That's back when you kind of did a little bit of everything and it wasn't so specialized. So I would animate, model, texture, everything, and then worked on Warcraft 3 for another expansion. Then the whole team, kind of the RTS team, went on to Starcraft 2, and that was like 10, 12 years on that. So we take our time at Blizzard. So, and then just kind of rose up to the ranks, became art director, and then now I'm doing consulting.
Love it. Wow, I cannot wait to dive deep, especially, the beginning of your career at Blizzard is, the Warcraft and the Warcraft sagas.
I'm playing Warcraft. Everyone's waiting for me.
One of the big specialties of Warcraft was creating much bigger armor and much bigger weapons, and that was pretty much due to the constraints of how the graphics and the pixels looked back then, right? But we could see that being translated in a lot of mobile games right now. We don't see a lot of the style that we're seeing in the World of Warcraft in the PC and console world, but mobile games had really, really taken that approach. But with New Genshin Impact and a lot of Asian motives that we're seeing, like League of Legends and other things, I feel like there's a new era of the art style that is coming, or just a giant mashup in the industry. Like, what are the styles and the trends and the inspirations that you are seeing?
I think you're right. There's kind of a mashup of a lot of different styles. I think, going back to what you said, Warcraft, we had such an engaging, casual style and really kind of, fantasy for the masses, and it got people, including friends of mine that aren't gamers at all, that wouldn't ever call themselves geeks, and they started playing it like crazy. It was just very accessible and very engaging. It wasn't cute. It was still tough, but it was very stylized, and I think it took the edge off of typical like hardcore D&D stuff. And like I said, there's the Asian impact, Jensen impact, the Asian influences. I think it's always been there. It's just more nowadays. There's not a whole lot of new things. It's almost like music, right? It's all kind of together, and it's more like execution and how you subtly twist it to help spin it for your own product and your own identity. I mean, personally, I would love to see more painterly games, and like in sci-fi, you don't see a whole lot of brushstrokes and like painterly, like rendered out games that much. It's mainly that's for fantasy, and so I think that's something that's not heavily utilized, but it's hard to see something unique looking these days as far as technique wise. It's all just, and when you look at it as a gamer, as a dev, you kind of deconstruct it and see like where the roots of, it's 20% this, 30% that, and it's hard to see what's new anymore. Kind of like music, like grunge hit or alternative music. It was like, oh, that's a new thing, and now it's like, it's no matter what kind of music you like, it's nothing is pops out as like brand new anymore.
Is there any games or any styles that are like talking more to you? Like if you were starting a new game, what would that be?
Oh, I mean, Hades has got a great, the art director's amazing. They have a really unique look, and it stands out, and it's simple, but it works really well. It has a core identity. Joe Madera's company, they made the Battle Chasers Night War game, and I think one of the League of Legends ones too. Broken King, I think, something like that.
Ruined King.
There you go. Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. And they have a kind of more unique painterly style, which I'm kind of drawn to that just because it's not as prevalent as some of the other typical chunky kind of Supercell / Warcraft look.
Let's go back to the World of Warcraft, right? This year's the 20th anniversary, right?
It's been a long time.
As far back as 20 years ago.
I don't know if all of our listeners and viewers know that pretty much it started like a Force version of Warcraft, and all of a sudden, all the previous versions obviously were the RTSs, and all of a sudden it's an MMORPG. It's a totally new take on it. Like, how did it start all the way in 2004? Like, what was the idea behind that? How scary was it?
I think we didn't know enough to be scared. We were just like, naive and just like, we can do anything. Let's just do this. And so I think it started out, there was a project, when I first got here, they just started Warcraft 3. And then there was a project on, I can't remember what it was called, but it was kind of like a Final Fantasy type new IP, and it wasn't going that well. So they had a small team on that on the side. The first time they tried 2 games at once. And then I remember one of the founders came in, and we were all playing EverQuest, like at lunchtime and after work. And, we're all like, young and single, and we're just like geek out at work and stay in the office and play games, order pizza, until wee hours in the morning, way back in the day. And we were playing EverQuest a bunch, and he comes in and he's like, all right, we're going to make one of these kind of games. I'm like, whoa, that's a bold statement. He's like, we can do better than this. And I think Blizzard, throughout the year, especially early on, it wasn't like we were coming up with brand new ideas as far as the concept, but we'd take something that worked really well and execute it better and put our own spin on it, right? And so, like Dune, the RTS and Warcraft came out of that. And so I remember having a big meeting it was a big meeting, and there's like maybe 100 people in there, and I was like, that was us as like a huge team, a huge company. And he's like, okay, raise your hands. Who wants to make a Starcraft game, MMO? And we're like, yeah. And I swear it was like 60-40. And he's like, awesome, it's Warcraft. And so, which was a good call in hindsight. And so we just dove right into it. And I think what allowed us to do that at some point was, there's a lot of tech involved with it, and it was somewhat based on the Warcraft 3 engine and at the very, very core early on. But I think what really allowed it to happen was, as far as the lore in the world building, was the Warcraft 1 and 2 were just orcs versus humans, and it was, there was a couple of other races in there, like goblins and ogres, but it wasn't pretty fleshed out as like kind of 1-to-1. And then with Warcraft 3, we just blew it open, had like the 4 unique races, and then like the sub races, and the story was way more involved, and the Cinematics team was rocking it, and it was just much more in depth. Chris Metzen was a creative director, and it was the first time we had a creative director, and he ran with that thing and just made such a huge, deep world with Warcraft 3 that when the time came to make the content for World of Warcraft, it just kind of like it was there, like the continents, the world was much bigger than the Warcraft 1 and 2, and so there's much more just meat on the bone, so to speak. There was just way more lore. The world was way more fleshed out. So I think if it wasn't for Warcraft 3, WoW would have had a much harder time just creating stuff from scratch.
Both games in StarCraft as well have a bunch of characters, races, locations, and as you mentioned, the Warcraft 1 and 2 just had only 2, right? Did you have a lot of constraints, or it was just like, let's add up whatever we want and see whatever sticks?
I think the art team had a pretty big say and a lot of freedom to do things. I remember it wasn't a free-for-all by any means, but it was much more, everything's more scrutinized nowadays. Like you have to have a 10-person committee to make sure this one building's okay, and everything's like so over-analyzed, and it just slows the process down. And back then we vetted everything, we made sure it was cool, but we just kind of went with our gut and just made fun, awesome stuff, and we had a blast doing it. That's probably I've had a lot of fun over the years at Blizzard, but that was probably the most enjoyable time, just because it was like just going all out, making fun stuff, and like we'd pitch something really cool, and when I pitched some crazy stuff over the years. I always wanted to put 2 heads on things, or 4 wings, or something crazy like that. And besides that, if we actually pitched something that had merit, Sammy was always really good about giving us a chance to like showcase it. And so I think we had a lot of agency, which is, as an art team, that's a lot of fun. We had a lot of ownership over it, which is a blast.
When did that change? When the game became too popular? When did the constraints start?
Oh man, I think just as you start getting I think as a company, philosophically, you start getting bigger, and like you're too worried about the your own brand name, and you should always be proud of your name, and that's it's like just like a person, right? You should be proud of what you produce and what your reputation stands for, but at the same time, I think you can overanalyze the hell out of stuff, right? And you get paralysis by analysis, and then it becomes too over scrutinized, or like early on, we didn't have a lot of community support. I mean, it wasn't like there wasn't as much community out there, right? There wasn't like the avenues we have now, and like the connection with the developers, which is great.
Sometimes it's like, why? And then you have to cater to like 0.002% of the gamers who are very vocal, and 99% people love what you did, but then all you hear is the 0.002% of people who like don't like something.
That's very true. I think with that answer, I was very conditioned just to always say that's awesome, because like the community is great. Like that's why people buy the games. But so many times you're right. It becomes down to like, hey, 10,000 people voted on this one skin we should do, or they had this one issue. I'm like, yeah, there's like 10 million people that were think it's awesome. And of course, it's only the squeaky wheel that shows up on the people that complain the most passionate, the ones that are on the forums or whatever. I remember after we shipped Warcraft 3, I was like, cool, I'm so proud of myself. Like my first game here, Blizzard, I'm going to go online and look at all the accolades. Everyone's going to love us on the forums. And it was just hate. And I'm like, just over random things. I'm like, what is going on here? This sucks. And so like, where's all the love? And everyone else is like, you young fool. Like that's not the internet is not about that.
The internet is a pain in the ass, brother.
I feel like it's always the craziest and the scariest to work on the franchises that already have a massive following, where, people are expecting certain things. And now, like, how do you follow what is already created, but also innovate so people are excited and surprised, but I guess not too surprised when they get it? I mean, what's the golden ratio here?
When we were making StarCraft 2, I was so intimidated because I'm like, oh my God, StarCraft 1 is so beloved. Like, Korea practically shut down the day it came out. And it was like, we have huge expectations, and like we don't want to screw anything up, and it was just like the secret sauce, like don't mess with it too much. And then I think we psyched ourselves out, at least I did. And then after in hindsight, looking back on it, we changed a bunch of stuff. Like as far as the units and even the look of the units, we changed a lot of things. Like everyone thinks the Marine is the same one as StarCraft 1, and if you look at them close up, they're nothing alike at all. I mean, it's hard to tell versus a shooter where you're just. In the RTS, they're so small. You just see like big shoulders and a gun. And we probably changed 60 or 70% of the units, and we even changed some things pretty significantly and called it the same name. And at the end of the day, if you ask anybody now what the real StarCraft is, they'll say StarCraft 2. Where even if you look art-wise, pixel to pixel, 1-to-1, we changed a whole bunch of stuff. I always tell the guys when we're making like say a new fire bat. So he doesn't have to have the same exact gloves or helmet, or none of that stuff matters. It's about the spirit of it. Like what's cool about him is he's a big, heavy dude. He's got tons of armor. He's got flames on him. He's bright colored. He's got big hoses somewhere. As long as you have those elements, you can pretty much do whatever you want, detail wise or proportion wise, and it's going to be fine. It's going to feel the same.
Right. Well, especially like if it's an RTS game, you have a very small version of it, so your forums need to be very, very readable. And it's not really about the detail; it's about overall forms of the character. Would you say that's how you design them, or is there any other secret sauce?
I think that's a big one when we first came on board, and I think every time we get a new artist come on board, they would make a character from the front, typical like front side view and everything, and we'd like, hey, that's cool, that's super important. But also always render it out every single time and sketch it out initially from like the game view, right, which is almost not quite top down, but 3/4. And so that's a huge thing, because especially with the RTS, like with a huge esports following like Starcraft, where you have to have instant recognition of something. And so I think oftentimes, like the pros will turn off like all the lighting and they'll make it look super ugly, which just breaks my artist's soul. But they need to make sure they can recognize everything instantly. And so silhouette, like I said, silhouette and color is a huge aspect of that. And so we got used to that over the years, just over exaggerating things, and even the animations, I would make things like it wouldn't be that subtle. It'd be like super kind of like up close, it would look kind of little dorky, little clownish, but everything was just over exaggerated. But when they're this big on screen, you kind of have to do that. So it's definitely a different way to approach it than say a shooter.
Wow. Like, I wonder how much of that could be also translated into like mobile phone games, where I feel like that's I mean, even the resolution is different right now, but like the screen size and how much is going on is pretty much the same as what you would compare playing on an older PC. So, what are the key things that you would say are making the game successful when you're developing them with like a small view in mind?
There's a ton of units on screen. Like there's 200 units on screen, so you have to kind of take into account like there's just going to be a massive. There's not like one dude like, hey, this is a tree or this is a siege tank or whatever, where you can easily identify it. It's you have to make sure that you take into account like what they look like as a group, like 5, 10, 100 of them moving together, and make sure they all they look smooth, and they're going to clip into each other. That's one thing that's nice about an RTS, and especially back in the day when the graphics weren't as tight as they are these days, as advanced, is we had less expectations, and so it's if things clipped in, and the arms clipped into each other or they overlap a little bit, nobody really cared. And I think most of the players in esports games don't care either. Like they just want the gameplay. They don't care about the art little glitches. But I think it makes you think differently about like the environments. We always were lamenting the fact we didn't have a sky. We couldn't show these cool like vistas because the camera was always top down. So we always just went deeper. Like we showed like holes in the ground, or like there'd be a space station. We'd show like a blasted out piece of debris or something, or a planet floating underneath it, because we couldn't go up. We couldn't actually see the sky. We'd have to use cutscenes for it. We couldn't have these beautiful environments the way we wanted to, because you're used to seeing like the sky is such a huge part of like any game. And so we basically had that stripped away from us. So it was kind of a challenge. But we started making things like glass floors for things so you could see through it. But then the Zerg would burrow in it, and you just see them like setting in the glass, like floating in midair, and like so we had to fix those kind of things. But it's definitely a different mindset. And so every time we get a new artist come in, we have to kind of train them up for like think about it from the gameplay view. And of course, at Blizzard, it was always gameplay first. So it wasn't like if there's any kind of conflict with, hey, this looks awesome, but it like kind of screws the gameplay a little bit. It's like, unless it was super, super rad or some kind of campaign thing that didn't affect multiplayer balance, then like nothing screwed with esports. Like that was like the golden rule.
I know there was a quite big of a stretch when you guys were transitioning from StarCraft 1 to StarCraft 2. Any battle stories? Any cool experiences from that time?
We had a really fun crew working on Warcraft 3. Most of us came over to StarCraft 2. A few went over to WoW, and there was some a little shuffling, but like that was kind of like the RTS team, so we all knew each other. So we kind of hit the ground running. We started off making art into the designers started designing the new stuff, and we didn't have the new engine yet, so we just started putting everything to Warcraft 3 and making like super quick, really rough looking units just to get it in there and playable. And so I think the fun stuff we had was getting the like new lighting and new shadows and all these new tech things on the art side that would like look super slick. I remember the first time we had dynamic shadows, so like the time of day it was free. You could turn a knob and it would just go back and forth and sunset and all that. And that was kind of new back then. We're like, whoa! And so I kept making these long cowboy shadows. Yeah, exactly. These long cowboy shadows, like the sunset kind of vibe, and it's like, it looks so cool. It's all dramatic, and then like you would take off here in the command center, and the shadow would be like over here. Because the angle of the sun was so steep, and so it makes some good screenshots, but it wasn't practical at all. So I think everyone always wanted to do in StarCraft 1, which you could squish units with the command center when you land, or just any of the Terran buildings. And at first they put it in there, and it was like kind of cool. Like you couldn't get out of the way, you would just nail the guy, and like, yeah, I killed you with my command center, and it's kind of pointless, but it was fun. Like, okay, it's harmless. Like nobody's gonna do that, and then. Of course, once you got a couple of the artists that were really good and a few of the designers, they would win games just by going over immediately and crushing all your SCVs with the command center.
Speaking of RTSs, right? I feel like after StarCraft 2, there was maybe a few more that created a big impact, but we can't really see a lot of RTSs, besides some of the mobile stuff, that are creating a splash. Do you think like we're in the end of the era of RTSs, or there's still an opportunity and room? Especially, the Evolution closing last year, I feel like was a big kind of like red flag for RTS as a genre in general.
It's hard to say. I mean, I think it's kind of a hardcore niche market to some degree. Like StarCraft had a huge following, but I mean, relatively speaking, compared to other games, it wasn't as big, but it had very passionate, loyal following. But I think there's still a lot of hope for more, I'm gonna say casual, like it's a dirty word, more accessible RTSs that you get more for the masses. Because I always was bummed out that StarCraft didn't get exposed to more people as far as the IP and the flavor of it, because the multiplayer was so hard. But there's companies like Frost Giant, there's a couple other ones that are making some more accessible takes on RTSs. I think that's going to kind of signal like a second age of a new age of RTSs. And so I think it's always going to be a little bit more challenging to sell it than a shooter, just because of the complexity of the game. You have to think a little more, and it's not as just point and shoot as a typical action game. But I think there's a lot of meat left on the bone, so to speak. There's a lot of market left for new games. I think we just have to kind of figure out how to package it and execute in a way that's not as punishing as like StarCraft was back in the day.
Do you think these are the things why there was never a StarCraft 3?
Yeah, I mean, internally, I think we'd love to have done that. And for a while, that we kept StarCraft 2, like a living product, a living game, and a live service for so long that we made like the Nova DLC packs afterwards, and we keep making the really awesome co-op commanders, and we kept releasing that stuff for quite a while, new skin packs. And so I think by the time it got through those, it was like, well, we did a whole bunch of new ideas we thought about that would make it into a new game, along the way, kind of extending out the life of StarCraft 2. So I think there's definitely a world where we could, now that there's been some time passed, I think now, same thing as the community. I think there's, like I'm ready for something like that. I think people are now, they're more, I think the older people are a little more hungry for something like that now, something new. And I think there's obviously like the next generation of younger players, like my kids or anyone younger than us, to go through and like kind of be exposed to that for the first time. So I think there's definitely potential there.
Do you feel like, are you seeing the trend for maybe not even having paid games anymore and just everybody transitioning into live service?
It's tricky. I mean, I think the number crunching and the Excel spreadsheets and all that stuff, that drives everything, obviously. And so with Microsoft now doing it, I'm not sure, what their motivation is going to be. But I mean, at least from a StarCraft fan still, even though I'm not at the company anymore, I still have hope that Microsoft, they made Age of Empires. They would fund other things that had the RTS roots in it. So I think hopefully there's something there on the road. But I think you're right when it comes down to it. Games like Diablo that are like a live service, and they're just everything's driven now by like what the bottom line is going to be. And I think that's kind of sad. Where, of course, it's the reality of it. But at the same time, I worked in some projects the last couple of years where we would just only look at ideas that had the money aspect on it, which, like we all want to make money. We all want to get paid. We want to make money so the company stays going, so we can continue to make cool games. It's not like money doesn't matter at all, but I think sometimes we look at it more like from the other point of view, like how do we make this amount of money? How do we get to that point? And just saying, okay, back when we did World of Warcraft and StarCraft 2 and Warcraft 3, was like, let's make a game we love and it's cool and in a smart way, not just willy nilly, but then we'd figure out how to monetize it and how to get it out there and like execute the hell out of it and trust our gut and our instincts to make something awesome. And now it feels like it's kind of the other way, where it's like, okay, we need to make this amount of money per year to cover the development costs. And so like, how do we get to that point? And it's like, well, now it's kind of like reverse engineering it the wrong way. And that's a very simplistic view. It's probably very polarizing, but that's kind of my general loose take on it is you need both sides of the coin with that. You need to have smart business people figure out the money aspect and how do you get to that point. Because otherwise, if you make a game nobody plays it, what's the point, right? You're all out of a job. But I think developers need to trust their instincts as much as they can. And we used to have not a saying, but we had a belief that if we love the game as a dev team, majority of it, not everyone's going to love everything about everything you're working on, but if we, as a dev team, majority of us loved the game, we played after work, we had fun playing, and we'd geek out on it, and we felt really good about it, that was a barometer. Like, we knew that it was going to be at least somewhat successful at that point.
Speaking of the risks and the stakes, the majority of your career you worked in games that needed permanent updates. And all updates are quite risky because of the consequences can be unpredictable. Do you have any good strategies, rules around that?
That's tricky. I think there's lots of ways to do that. I think once you get a sequel out there, it's trying to figure out, like, there's kind of two main buckets, which is, one is, hey, what did we not do the first time around because we didn't have time or money or schedule or whatever. or we couldn't solve X, Y, and Z. Like, okay, like how do we make the better version of the thing we want, like more of the true vision or the deluxe version of the thing we originally shipped. And the other one is like, how do we make it more expansive? How do we get deeper with it? Like another race or new content or new mechanic, things like that. But it usually falls in those two buckets where it's like trying to polish it up really much, a whole bunch, and trying to get it more full dream, or you're trying to like, add a little extra flavor to it and sprinkle in some extra new stuff. And I think that's cool about the Nova DLC for StarCraft 2, where in the co-op commanders, where we told the story once Legacy of the Void ended. We're like, hey, that's kind of the story. Like we wrapped everything up. Kerrigan took off as a space god with Raynor, and they're off having space babies or something. And then like there's nothing. Everybody's all happy with each other. Like the conflict's over. That's kind of it. Like, okay, there's nowhere for there's this peace in the galaxy. Well, that sucks for an RTS. So there's no war. And so then we went to co-op commanders, and then the Nova DLC, which is kind of fun. Because we were kind of not painting ourselves in the corner, but we were kind of back in the corner as far as like the main story arc had finished in a tremendous way. But I think then we said, okay, let's zoom in on one character and make more of a installation mission type, almost like an action game where she had like a loadout, and we did like an arcade side scroller where she was riding a hover bike, a vulture, and it had boss fights, and we just did like just fun stuff, and it was kind of crazy, like things that wouldn't have flew back in the day because it wasn't traditional enough. But now we kind of had the freedom because we needed to force ourselves to kind of think outside the box to do something worthwhile to actually ship. So we got to do a lot of fun things in that one, so I'm very proud of that.
We had some wonderful times.
Both of us know you're quite a guru in fantasy and slightly sci-fi game styles. I was wondering if there's any, tips or tricks if somebody's starting developing a game. What are the things that they should account if they're considering those styles and inspiration? And for yourself, like, would you source inspiration, especially on larger scale games? Is it fantasy books? Is it movies? Is it fine art? Like, how do you come up with ideas?
I think if you're making something new, like I'm actually planning to tinker around with a new IP myself, and so I think it's trying to make it fresh, but accessible. And so I think that's the tricky part is you want to make something new, because otherwise, there's everything's so generic these days. Like there's how many zombie games, there's so many World of Warcraft copy games, but like there's League of Legends, wannabes, all this stuff. And so I think it's trying to figure out how to make at least on the IP side, how to make the content and actually the look of the in-game art feel like you instantly get what's going on. You feel familiar enough with it where it's not gonna like strain your brain to understand like what you're looking at. But when you dig deeper, there's like more unique depth behind it. So I think the initial surface has to be a little, something that you're not gonna be like, like there's some kind of alien creatures. You're like, gelatinous blobs. And you're like, what the hell is that, right? You have to do something that initially gets your brain just to make a connection with it. It makes a pattern connection. But then I think when you dig deeper into it and peel back the layers, there's a lot more depth and just original ideas. If you try to do something right out of the gate, especially with a new company that's super unique, I mean, that's such a hard challenge. I think I psyched myself out trying to do that with one of our internal projects. I was like, I'm gonna re-envision the look of like a whole new look brand new from scratch, and I think I hung myself with that one because that's such a high bar, and then you realize later on you don't have to do that. You can execute different ways on it. There's lots of ways you can tweak things to enhance them, to give them your own flavor and your own spin on it. But it's super hard to be like, here's a brand new thing no one's ever seen before. Like the first time cel-shaded games came out, like Jet Set Radio or a little bit like Borderlands. Like, oh, hey, that's kind of new. Like, that's cool. So
how do you make things exciting and fresh without hanging yourself? What has been working out for you?
That's a trick. I think whenever I left, I started just looking at other inspirations for like in movies. I read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy books. And like Dune came out, which is tremendous. I mean, the art direction of that movie is insane. Yeah. If you ever saw it, like the Arrival, and of course he did Blade Runner 2049, I think. The same director, and they're so visually stunning. And so I was looking at a lot more movie art direction stuff. Going back, I had these books from like Wayne Barlow, he's an old artist that did concept art and paintings back when I was at 3D Realms like 26, 27 years ago. And
Wow.
I looked through my old books of those and just started looking at some of the old inspiration I had originally. And so that was kind of cool seeing him like still making really relevant, fun stuff. And so I think it's hard to sit down and like an account and just be like, okay, I'm gonna make X, Y, Z. I'm gonna make a new idea right now.
I'm gonna make it
Right
fresh,
now.
cool.
Yeah. Just do it. It has to be it's got to be one of those things where you put on your socks, you're like, oh shit, like I just thought of something cool, right? And so I think I've had some success with AI. I've been tinkering with that a bit, and sometimes I'll just make random stuff, and like it's like cloud watching, right? It's something like just will come up and like it's not what I was intended, but I see something else, and I'm like, oh wait, there's something else I can pull out of there that's completely different from the content it was supposed to be. So it's like watching clouds. You just kind of let your brain kind of focus in on the cool things and kind of trust your instincts. But it sometimes you go through dry spells, which is frustrating.
Well, I feel like I've learned a lot. If you guys learned a lot from this show, please subscribe, like, share, tell your friends, tell what you like, tell you what you don't like. Alan, thank you so much for having courage coming on today's show. I'm excited to see what the future brings for you and what new, fresh, exciting, and not causing you to hang yourself styles and games that you're going to be coming up with in the nearest future. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. That was super fun. It was a blast. And as usual, you guys always put on an awesome show, and I'm lucky to be part of it.